Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with all of you here today to spend the afternoon as we kick off another Inflation Reduction Act implementation webinar. Today, we're going to learn about the clean energy infrastructure funding available for schools, thanks to the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act. A special thank you to Sarah Ross, co-founder of Undaunted K-12, to Natalia Akopian, Government Affairs Associate from the World Resources Institute, and to Humera Fasahuddin, Hadley Public Schools Board Chair and co-director of the Innovation Fellows D School at Stanford, who will share how school superintendents, district leaders, and educators can buy clean new school buses, deploy clean energy, cut their energy bills through grant funding opportunities and tax incentives with direct pay. I also wanted to give a special shout out to AP Environmental Science students at Boston Latin Academy for joining us today. School and community leaders have an unprecedented opportunity right now to turn their vision of climate action into a reality for every school in Massachusetts. We're also joined, by the way, by Beth Contos, the president of the AFT, the American Federation of Teachers for Massachusetts. But we need dollars to bring the dreams of each and every school community off the chalkboard and into classrooms all across the Commonwealth. And that's why I'm proud to have worked to pass the Inflation Reduction Act, the largest climate and clean energy investment in our nation's history. We passed new uncapped tax incentives to purchase new electric school buses, build charging infrastructure, install heat pumps and dynamic glass, and set up solar and energy storage systems in schools and libraries and labs, and a lot more. And for the first time ever, schools that do not pay a dime in federal taxes can get a check in hand for making green infrastructure investments. And with that money, schools can reduce energy costs, put every dollar saved on their bills towards teaching and school services instead. The combination of investments powered by the Inflation Reduction Act and funding from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law will help our schools build a safe and healthy future while you educate the students who will inherit that future. Earlier this year, I visited Worcester to celebrate the nearly $6 million in EPA Clean School Bus grants that will deliver 15 American union-made electric buses to Worcester. And it's just the beginning. With more than $30 million in grant funding to school districts across Massachusetts, these clean buses, these electric buses, are just one example of how these federal programs will put the entire Commonwealth at the top of the class in moving to a greener and cleaner future. So this is just the beginning, and I look forward to continuing to work with you to chart our nation's path to a cleaner future while protecting the children who will lead us into that future. Children are only 20% of our population, but they're 100% of our future. And that's what today's discussion is all about. It's about ensuring that those young people, the green generation, live in a world that reflects their values. And that's what today's webinar is going to be all about. It's making sure that schools are able to gain access to the funding which they qualify for in order to green the present and the future for young people all across the Commonwealth. So we've got a great team on my staff that works on these issues. And Katie Morphle up in my Boston office, run for the whole state, is running today's webinar, and she's become an expert on this subject. So let me, Katie, turn it over to you so that we can begin the discussion.
Thank you, Senator. So for today's presentation, we're excited to have Sarah Ross with us from Undaunted K-12. Sarah is going to be our first presenter, and we should be pulling her slides up on the screen now, and she can begin. Afterwards, we're going to hear from Natalia from the World Resources Institute, as well as with a slideshow presentation. And then finally, we will be hearing from Humera with the description about how the Hadley School Board has been scoping out ground source heat pump systems, and a personal story to share about how that went for her and her school. So we'll get the slides up on the screen now and turn it over to you, Sarah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. This is extraordinarily exciting. Thank you, Senator Markey, for your leadership. We wouldn't, of course, be having this conversation and this opportunity without your leadership and other members of Congress in getting the job done with the Inflation Reduction Act. So thank you so much. You can move on to the next slide. My name is Sarah Ross. I'm a parent out in Western Massachusetts, Amherst, and I'm also the co-founder of a national nonprofit, Undaunted K-12, whose whole mission is to support our public schools in making an equitable, and I would say rapid, transition to zero carbon emissions, while also preparing young people for what's to come. You know, a lot of the themes that we talk about are student health and learning, some of the reasons to do this work, building more resilient communities, really taking responsibility for, you know, fiscal stewardship of our schools, and clean energy can help with that. And yeah, and lastly, you know, responding to young people's call to action. Next slide. So the Inflation Reduction Act is here, as the Senator was talking about. It passed in August of 2022. And you might have seen lots of headlines around this massive piece of legislation. But one very exciting headline that we talk about is the one over on the right from EdWeek that says, you know, schools too can participate in this massive new opportunity through the Inflation Reduction Act. Next slide. Schools, in fact, are, you know, intended recipients of clean energy tax credits. You know, tax credits and schools don't normally go together, but as the Senator was mentioning, now, you know, clean energy, which we have for so long incentivized through tax credits, now clean energy isn't just for taxpayers anymore. It's also for our schools. Here's a great fact sheet from the Treasury Department. You can take it right from them. Next slide. So those of us that have been living in schools land, you know, there have been a few actually recent buckets of federal dollars that we can use to support our school infrastructure, which is kind of a rarity. We had the ESSER funds. Many of you are still maybe working to spend the last of those ESSER dollars. We had the bipartisan infrastructure, where there is a lot of good money for schools, also particularly clean school buses. But what we're going to be mostly focused on today is the Inflation Reduction Act. And within that large piece of legislation, there are really three types of dollars that schools might end up harvesting to really improve their facilities. One are grants. Those are, you know, tend to be very competitive. You apply for them, but there are some great grant opportunities out there. On the right-hand side, some financing opportunities are still on the horizon. An exciting one, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund that the Senator worked very heavily on, still on the horizon, but you know, we are among others working to really shape those opportunities to come into focus for schools. The one I'm going to focus on today are the tax credits. Next slide, because those are here and now, and from our estimation, the single largest opportunity for schools in the Inflation Reduction Act, going back to the Senator's comment that these are uncapped. So we really have a great opportunity here. Next slide. So what's so special about these tax credits? In addition to being uncapped, they are non-competitive. If you install eligible technologies, and we'll talk about what those are, you are eligible to file for and receive these clean energy tax credits. Now, even though it's a tax credit, again, don't be confused, it's going to come to you, a school district, a non-taxable entity, as a cash reimbursement. This is a new and exciting feature of the Inflation Reduction Act. The White House calls it direct pay. If you're talking to the IRS, they call it elective pay. It's the same thing, and it turns a tax credit into a cash reimbursement for schools and also all non-taxable entities. So our cities, our towns, our nonprofits. These tax credits are available for a good long period of time. 2032 at current levels. We'll be talking about ground source heat pumps from Humera's district. Those are available until 2035. So, we actually have time to build a strategy around taking down as many of these dollars as possible and putting them to good use in the state of Massachusetts. So really exciting opportunity. And again, unlimited funding, that's for you, the district, for the state of Massachusetts, for this program overall. There is no cap on the funding available. There's no annual appropriation this is subject to. So again, this is a huge and massive opportunity for us. Next slide. So what are the clean energy machines? There are actually many, but I'm going to focus on the big 5 that we see most often being considered or increasingly being installed in schools. So know that there's a longer list, but these are the big ones for you all to think about in schools context. First, heat pumps, and specifically ground source heat pumps. Those give us the opportunity to heat our schools with a hugely efficient machine that doesn't burn any fossil fuels on site, so we're not making air pollution worse. Importantly, in Massachusetts, they also bring us cooling, so it's a 2-for-1 machine. I have kids in the Amherst Public Schools, and I remember back to September when they started school, and they said, "Mom, this first week was a total write-off. We couldn't think in our classrooms. It was too hot." We know many of our schools need air conditioning. Heat pumps can help us get there and help us transition to clean energy. Next up, electric vehicles. You'll hear a lot about these from Natalia, a clean form of transportation. So again, we're not contributing to local air pollution and we're not undermining young people's abilities. We know that breathing in those fumes are bad for their young brains. Third, solar. 1 out of every 10 schools across the country has already installed solar. We can get more in our schools in Massachusetts. They can help us run those clean energy machines we just talked about, our heat pumps, our electric school buses, and do so at a low cost and a fixed cost. So budgetary certainty for those electrons coming from our solar array. Next, energy storage. This is Massachusetts, a really exciting place to install energy storage. We can store those clean electrons that we can make ourselves or from the grid. We can use this to defray our demand charges, those charges that we get hit with when we're using a lot of energy from the utilities. And we can use it potentially for resilience. So making sure that schools can stay operational and be a safe place for community members when we need emergency shelters. And lastly, EV charging equipment, for our buses, but also for parents and educators, all of us that are increasingly getting excited around driving electric vehicles. So there's a lot of great reasons why schools would embrace these technologies, from budgetary savings to health to providing learning opportunities for young people. So many good reasons that schools would want these machines. Next slide. So to give you some sense about, the typical credit, these uncapped dollars from the federal government for these technologies. If you were to install ground source heat pumps in your school, a typical credit for school might be something like $3 million. So a decent amount of money here, a good amount of money. Electric vehicles, up to $40,000 per bus. You can also get money towards other district vehicles, but for school buses, up to $40K per bus. Solar energy, you might get a typical credit of about $500,000, depending on the size of your array, energy storage, and so on. And advance the slide. So really, we have an opportunity across the country for this to be the largest federal investment in our school facilities. If you can advance the slide for me there. If, for example, 5,000, if Massachusetts were to participate with schools across the country, and if 5,000 schools across the country installed ground source heat pumps, that would be $15 billion of federal investment in our school facilities. We don't see a federal investment in our school facilities very often. In order for these numbers to happen, right, in order for us to unlock these federal dollars for our schools, we need people in districts making the decisions to actually take these clean energy machines off the shelf. The federal government, the Senate, they've done their work. They've created this opportunity. They've opened the door. It's now up to us in our communities to make these choices and make this the single largest investment in our school facilities in history from a federal perspective. Next slide. And we're already starting to do it. So here's 2 exciting examples from Massachusetts. On the left, you're seeing my own from Amherst, Fort River School, where we're building a new school. Shovels just went in the ground a few weeks ago. We had our opening ceremony. And as we were planning this school, we're a community where we've committed to do net zero schools or net zero buildings in our municipal infrastructure. But nonetheless, we priced out a gas boiler and a clean machine, the ground source heat pump. And we saw that once we took into consideration these federal tax credits, which you're seeing here, $3.8 million expected, and we took into consideration great incentives from Mass Save, our utility energy efficiency program that we can stack with those federal tax credits. Once we took into consideration those two pieces, lo and behold, the clean energy machine, the ground source heat pump, was actually the lowest, the most affordable machine to install compared to the more traditional, more conventional kind of legacy equipment of a gas boiler that you would commonly see and is still in the vast majority of our schools. So this is an extremely exciting new set of kind of the new economic landscape we're living here, thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act. Similarly, down in New Bedford, they're building a new school, the DeVal School, and they also looked at their various HVAC options. And similarly, lo and behold, federal tax credit, Mass Save incentives, their most affordable option was to install the best option from a climate perspective, from an operating cost perspective, from a student health and learning perspective, a ground source heat pump. So really exciting evidence. Next slide. Those two are new construction examples. Here's an example just across the board in Connecticut of a renovation. Sorry, the numbers got a little garbled there. But what you're basically seeing is how much does it cost to run a school using different machines over 30 years? Because again, we hold on to our schools and depend on our schools to operate for us for decades. And they looked and found that if we installed the gas boiler, the more traditional machine, it was going to cost us $12.9 million to run that machine over 30 years versus the clean energy machine at 10.1. And now, because of the Inflation Reduction Act, 8.6 million. So again, the lowest cost machine to install, and then the more affordable machine to operate through time, both in new construction and we're seeing here also in renovation. So if you have an existing building, this might also be a very affordable option for you and the most fiscally responsible to embrace. Next slide. As you get more into this policy, you will learn about labor standards. This policy wants to help us embrace clean energy, but also wants us to help build good jobs. It wants to make sure that we're doing it in communities that are that need the most help or are proximate to former fossil fuel facilities. So Humera is in a community where they're going to get an extra 10% off. And also we want to be stimulating domestic manufacturing. So there are important parts of these policies that will touch on those three additional aspirations. Next slide. So how do we figure out how much these tax credits could be worth? I'll touch on one of the pieces, which is the investment tax credit, which covers solar, energy storage, and ground source heat pumps. And I'll leave it up to Natalia to go over how we think about our clean commercial vehicles and our EV charging equipment. Next slide. So quickly, it is basically based on how much we spent to put that machine into action, some features of the project, where is it located? Did we meet labor standards? Did we use domestic made goods? Those will affect what percent we apply to the amount we spent. And then there's a slight adjustment that we make if we're using tax-exempt financing. Next slide, I'll show a quick example. So these adders, we start at 6% of the project cost. If we're a small project that is under 1 megawatt, which many will be, we go immediately to 30%. We can also do that by meeting labor standards. And then there are these additional adders. So we can get up to 50% off the cost of our ground source heat pumps. We can compete for an additional adder and get up to 70% off the cost of solar. Next slide. Being mindful of time here, There's a quick example just to show you, how you would think about a base credit, an adder, and an adjustment for tax-exempt bonds. With this example coming out at 34% of the cost being how you would think about your tax credit, your expected tax credit. Next slide. So, this is an example just showing if you install ground source heat pumps and solar and energy storage, you might expect over $4 million from the IRS as a federal reimbursement. So a large amount of cost defrayed for our local communities to embrace these machines. Next slide. All right, I just gave you a quick flyover there. There's lots more on our website that I hope you will check out. The what, the why, the who, and the how of these clean energy tax credits. And we're excited to help and hear about more of the good work that we're going to do in our Massachusetts school districts to embrace these machines. Next slide. Passing it over to you, Natalia.
Thanks, Sarah. I think, yes, cool, we have our slides up. Hi, everyone. My name is Natalia Kopian. I'm a Policy and Government Affairs Associate with the Electric School Bus Initiative at the World Resources Institute. Our mission here at the Electric School Bus Initiative is to transition the nation's school bus fleets to a 100% electric, working hand in hand with schools, utilities, manufacturers, policymakers, and local communities to make that transition a reality. I want to extend a thank you again to Senator Markey and his team for the gracious invite to come and speak with you all about tax credits and federal funding opportunities, specifically for electric school buses. Next slide, please. So I do have to read this disclaimer quickly before the lawyers get mad at me. So I'll just read it off real quick. This presentation is a summary of final guidance on the elective pay provision released by the IRS on March 5th, 2024. This guidance may be superseded by any changes made by the IRS on further iterations of guidance. Although every effort has been made to provide complete and accurate information, WRI makes no warranties, express or implied, to the accuracy of this summary, assumes no liability for its use. You're strongly encouraged to review the official IRS guidance or any subsequent versions of the guidance that the IRS may issue. Next slide. Okay, cool. On to the fun stuff. So as Sarah mentioned in her presentation, as Senator Markey talked about at the beginning, the Inflation Reduction Act has provided a huge opportunity for school districts to be part of the clean energy transition for the first time ever, thanks to this elective pay mechanism. So I'll be taking some time to talk about two credits in particular, Section 45W and Section 30C. The long story short there is that Section 45W provides up to $40,000 per electric school bus, and Section 30C provides up to $100,000 per charging infrastructure for schools located in a low-income or non-urban area. And I'll get into more detail about those two in the next slide, please. Okay, so up first we have Section 45W, which is formally known as the Qualified Commercial Clean Vehicle Tax Credit. Electric school buses are just one of the eligible projects under this credit. But because of the our initiative, that's the only project I'll be discussing here. So for calculating this credit, calculating the credit amount that a school may receive, IRS uses one of two calculations and goes with the lower number. So basically, they calculate what 30% of the cost basis would be, meaning 30% of the overall cost of the bus, and they look at the incremental cost between a electric school bus and a diesel school bus of the same weight class. Because these numbers are both typically over the maximum value of the credit, which is $40,000, it doesn't really matter which calculation IRS goes with, but I wanted you all to have kind of the big picture there. Another key thing to note with this credit is that IRS has published a safe harbor provision where they basically provide you with standard numbers that you can use for an incremental cost calculation. But regardless, the school can choose to present independent determinations if they choose to do so. The really cool thing about this credit, though, is that there is no geographic restrictions, meaning that any school purchasing an ESB, regardless of its location, can apply for the credit. We have a one-pager on this credit that I'm sure we'll send around after this webinar as well that goes into detail on the calculation piece, because I know it's a little bit hard to understand from just one slide. So that will be coming to you guys after this. Next slide, please. Here, I'll be talking a little bit more about 30C, which is known as the Alternative Fuel Refueling Property Credit. Lots of words. This includes electric and biodirectional charging infrastructure. So Sarah touched upon the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements or the labor standards a bit earlier in the presentation. Those apply to this credit as well. So if those labor standards are met, then schools can receive up to 30% of project costs in the form of a direct payment with a maximum threshold of $100,000 per single unit of charging infrastructure. I mean, you can't really understate that enough. Final guidance on 30C has not yet been released, so we don't yet know what's included in project costs. But we do know that it's based on a single unit of charging infrastructure rather than, at a bus depot as a collective. Unlike the 45W credit that's available everywhere, this credit 30C is limited to low-income communities and non-urban areas. IRS partnered with DOE to develop this tool. It's called the Argonne 30C Eligibility Locator Tool, long name. It's linked in the presentation you guys will be able to access afterwards, where you can type in the address of where the chargers will be installed to determine whether it falls within one of the qualifying census tracts. So it makes it really easy to know if you're an eligible entity. Next slide, please. Oh, one back, couple more, please. This, perfect, cool. This is the last bit I'll talk about the tax credits. I just wanted to mention how third-party money fits in. So if your school has received federal or state funding through different grants or for forgivable loans for your electric school buses or charging infrastructure, it's important to note some of these restrictions. Basically, to translate some of the IRS jargon, the total value of the grant that you received combined with a tax credit can't exceed the total cost of the project. That doesn't include any funds that the school may have used, say, in their transportation budget. So that's not included in the calculation, but the bottom line is that a grant and a tax credit combined can't exceed the overall cost of, let's say, the bus. On the next slide, I have a couple examples that I hope can help illustrate this a little bit. So here we assume that each of the school districts is purchasing an electric school bus priced at $400,000, which would be the cost basis. On the left, you have school district A that received a grant that covered the full cost of the bus. So a $400,000 grant. If you combine that with the tax credit, it would exceed the cost basis, meaning the tax credit's reduced to zero. The school would not receive any direct payment in that one. The middle example illustrates how the tax credit can be reduced. So you don't have to only receive $40,000 or zero. You can, receive something in the middle. And the example on the right, school district C, is kind of the perfect scenario where the school received a lower grant amount. Combining that with the full tax credit amount, it doesn't exceed the total cost of the bus. So the school would receive the full tax credit of $40,000. And you see an example B and C, the school district funds or their transportation budget, whatever they used, isn't included in that calculation. So you're just looking at whether the grant and the tax credit together would exceed the full cost of the bus at like the purchase price. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'll touch upon a few other funding programs quickly. Next slide. So the big one that some of you may be familiar with is the Clean School Bus Program. This is the $5 billion through the bipartisan infrastructure law that has been steadily funding tons of school buses, electric school buses across the country. We are expecting the third round, the 2023 rebate round awardees to be notified sometime soon, likely this month. So that's really exciting. Hopefully some of them are coming to Massachusetts. And when the next round of funding is opened up, like in previous rounds, we've posted how to apply page and other tidbits on our website that can be sent out to you guys after this as well. Next slide, please. The next funding opportunity to keep an eye out for is the Clean Heavy Duty Vehicle Program, which we actually just received an email about a couple hours before this webinar. So we know it's on the horizon. This is a $1 billion program through the Inflation Reduction Act for Class 6 and 7 vehicles, which includes electric school buses. While the guidance isn't out yet, the notice for funding opportunity is set to come out in the coming weeks. So we'll know more about the application process when that arrives, but likely it will mirror some of the grant programs that we've seen with the Clean School Bus Program. What we do know that's unique to this program is that at least $400 million of the funding will be set aside and going to communities in non-attainment areas, which is really great to see. Next slide, I think is my last one. Yes, cool. Lastly, we have tons of additional resources and guides on our website, electricschoolbusinitiative.org. We have everything from, tips on how to engage with your utility, how to work on charging infrastructure, an ESB technician training database if you're interested in training up some of your staff, understanding your funding and financing options. There's a lot that we help support your electric school bus transition. We also offer free one-on-one office hours for anyone and everyone that can sign up to discuss any questions you may have about your ESB transition. Sure, we'll send that out afterwards too. I think I'm giving it back to you for to wrap up, Sarah. That's correct. Yes.
Great. And I do want to hand it over to Humera here very quickly. So, 5 actions to get you all started on your way. 1, put IRA on the agenda with your other district leaders. Start talking about with other folks in your executive team. 2, certainly claim credits for any work that is eligible for 2023. Every week or so, I talk to a school leader who did some work that they didn't know was eligible for tax credits, and they're there for them. 3rd, if you've got projects right now that are underway that are incorporating these clean energy machines that we talked about, make sure your project leaders know how to align those projects with the new rules of the road of the IRA so that you maximize your credit. 4th, if you've got projects that are still early on and being conceptualized, reevaluate. Instead of building that new school with a gas boiler, instead of replacing our old gas boiler with another version of the same, can we make a different choice now with these new dollars? And last, certainly, bring an IRA lens to your long-term facilities and capital plans. I hope those are a helpful 5 actions to get you started on your way. Next slide. And I think with that, maybe we are turning it over to Humera to hear about the story of Hadley.
Great. Thank you, Sarah, and really appreciate being with you all here. Natalia, Senator Markey, Katie, the whole team. Really happy to be here today to tell you a little bit about the story of Hadley Public Schools in Hadley, Massachusetts. We are a small 5,000 population town. We have a high school, middle school, and an elementary school. And our ESSER dollars, when we received them, our school committee, our school leadership did a survey to sort of assess how we wanted to use those dollars, and we wanted to use it in a responsible way. We did not want to use it towards operational dollars or something that would create a fiscal cliff. We wanted to put it towards something that would be lasting. And so conducting a school-wide survey, one of the elements that the school community really pointed to was the need to upgrade our infrastructure, particularly at the high school and middle school. The building was built in 1954, and we had a hunch that the building itself had really strong bones, but that it needed some major infrastructure upgrades. And so we hired a reputable, large real estate firm that has a strong engineering and design practice to do the analysis and identify for us where capital could be applied. And through that work, they presented to us a 10-year capital plan, which we adopted. And this was back in, at this point, 2023. And so we did have questions about that presentation, however, because it did not include any green technologies. It did not include any solar technologies. And in that presentation, we asked those questions, but we didn't go back to the drawing board to say, hey, let's revise this. It was several months later at a Massachusetts Association of School Committees meeting when Undaunted K-12 and Sarah Ross, along with our local utility, Eversource, and a number of others, really illuminated some of the incentives that were available. And so that is what really precipitated our school leadership to go back to the drawing board and really press our engineering design firm and our utilities company to do the analysis of what kinds of green technologies could we adopt. So we commissioned what's called a scoping study, and it's basically a tool that allows the electric company and the engineering firm to say, this is our hypothesis about what kind of system you could get and what size it would need to be and what incentives we think would apply. And thank goodness for Undaunted K-12 really helping that to really ground that analysis in the kinds of things that were knowledgeable or factual coming out of the Inflation Reduction Act, but hadn't yet been instituted or utilized by other school districts. So we were really learning as we went. And I would say that what we learned really surprised us. In essence, because we are in one of those districts that used to have a coal facility at some point 30, 40 years ago, and because we would be sourcing locally, and because all those other factors, we would qualify for the maximum amount of incentive, tax incentive. We had no idea that direct pay was a thing, and we really had to educate our town that yes, you'll be putting up money up front, but we will be getting a check from the federal government once we prove out that our incentives really were met. And so what we learned was we didn't have to, so the 10-year capital plan called for in year 2 replacing our oil burning HVAC system with another oil burning HVAC system. And instead, with this new analysis, we said, what would it look like if we instituted ground source heat pump? So full geothermal. And what we learned was, instead of costing $1.8 million for the oil burning system, we would be paying not $3.6 million for the ground source heat pump, but rather $900,000 after all incentives were said and done. And that is huge financial rationale for going in this direction. Not only is it less expensive, but also we would be getting heating and cooling throughout the entire building. And we'd be moving to clean and green technologies. And when you consider that all our municipalities, 70% of the buildings in our towns are comprised of those municipalities, we have to move those municipal buildings, particularly the school systems, over to green technologies. So we're excited to embark on the next part of the journey, which was to agree to spend $300,000 on an engineering study that allows the engineers to actually, in much greater detail, lay out what's required in the switching out of all the infrastructure to allow this to happen. We're also investigating solar to offset the electric bill increase that will, of course, happen when we go this route. And we're taking the year to really talk to our select board, our town officials, and all stakeholders, our clean climate committee, and really talk up the importance of going down this path so that when the time comes for the select board in town meeting, because this is really key, schools and school board leaders don't own the building. We can't authorize this kind of spending on this kind of infrastructure spend. So we have to work with our town. And fortunately, we have a very generous town and very astute business people who understand the value proposition here. So we're excited to pursue this. But I think the key takeaways I would leave to you, if you're a student, a parent, or a teacher, your district may or may not be aware at all about these possibilities. Bring them a recording of this webinar. Urge them to take a look at these possibilities. And I would say, we may not have a lot of examples out there, but we have to be the first to make it happen. And I'd be excited to talk with any school district or school leader about getting started.
Thank you, Humera. That was fantastic just to hear your perspective being on the ground and doing the work, and hopefully was really helpful to the other folks who are on the webinar today who are thinking about how they can translate everything that Sarah and Natalia said into action and get things moving.